I'm here at Martin Station, just beautiful site, and I've got Mike Miller, and we're talking about gunsmithing and the life of the gunsmith in the 18th century. Give me an idea about, you're on the frontier and you're a gunsmith. What's your life like? What are you going to be doing?
Well, I'm not going to be building guns every day because in this area, we're at the Cumberland Gap. It is the jump-off place. This is one of the last forts and last pieces of civilization in the area. So I would be working on guns when I had the chance. I would also probably be over in the blacksmith shop repairing things and taking care of things like that, because for my persona that I'm doing here, I am a master blacksmith, a master gunsmith. So I can make barrels, I can make locks, I can cast triggers and cast all the trigger guards and everything. So I can do every single piece of the gun. Generally, however, it would have been more economical if I was ordering the parts to be sent here, and then I would assemble the parts here. I would stock the guns. I could make them pretty, I could do the carving, I could do some engraving on them. I would have been one of the more wealthy settlers here because I'm important. I mean, that's just kind of
one of the most crucial tools right here
Yes.
in the frontier.
One reference that I found of a North Carolina gunsmith was he was a German-born man, trained as a gunsmith in Germany, came over here and was building guns in Pennsylvania for a while. He was a Moravian. They sent him to the Salem area, Bethabara, North Carolina, and he refused to do militia duty. And they said, "We can't have this. This is like mutiny. You can't do this." And he said, "Well, you do what you want to, but I'm not going." And they said, "Why not?" And he said, "Because if I get hurt, who fixes your guns?"
Should they excuse him his duty?
They fined him.
Well, yeah.
And he paid grudgingly the fine every month.
Sure.
And so occasionally people will come in here and they'll say, "Are you going to do the battle?" And I said, "No, if I get hurt, who's going to fix their guns?" And so I just wander off. But that's how that works. And those guys, a lot of them were German. They were somewhat arrogant because they had a skill that was very valuable out here in the woods. I have in this spot, we made an entire gun here. And I forged the lock for it. Williamsburg forged the barrel. It was bored up and reamed up in Williamsburg, and then it was brought back here and rifled. And then Andy Thomas, the gunsmith that's here most of the time, cast the brass parts and assembled the whole gun. And then once he carved it, I engraved it. And then it was finished. And it was raffled off and gone. So we did basically what could have been done here by one or two gunsmiths that were working full-time here doing this work. We would repair the militia guns, which we did all morning long today, and most Fridays and Saturdays we fix the militia guns.
Yeah.
And Sunday morning we'll be fixing them after they break them Saturday. And it's the same thing. If somebody's screw broke, I go forge a screw, come back, file it up, fit it, and tap it, and screw it in the gun, and it's gone.
So you just can't go out to a store. You've got to make it from
This is
scratch.
Yes, every piece here, iron was very valuable, so that's one of the reasons why the guns built here would have had brass mounts. Casting brass was easier and cheaper. The iron, a piece of small scrap of iron could make a lot of screws. Screws were very expensive because most of them were handmade. You couldn't just get a blank and then screw it into a die and you're done. It had to be forged, filed, and then the wood screws were almost all handmade, cutting the
It's hard to
threads.
imagine a modern day
Yes.
that every screw's handmade,
Yes.
turning all those threads on there.
And I've done that a lot. And that screw goes in that hole, and it don't swap them because they won't fit. I've gotten where I can probably fudge and it would work, but I don't like to do that. They would use draw plates and draw out the wire to make the pins with. They could do whatever they needed to do to make every single piece of a gun or the pieces of guns that were already built and repaired here.
What's it sound like in a gunsmith shop in the 18th century?
It depends on the day. A lot of times gunsmith shops were reasonably quiet. It was a place that people hung out as long as the gunsmith would tolerate them. Sometimes they'd throw things and get them out. I do the same thing at my place. If they're too loud, get out. If they're okay, I'll work with them. If I'm filing, that's all you hear is scratchy noises. If I'm forging a hammer or cock for the lock, it's noisy. There's not a lot of loud. It's just a lot of annoying. There's nothing like watching
Screech.
people filing. draw filing the barrel. If you forge the barrel here, you've got the forge scale on the outside of the barrel, so you got to scratch that off, or you will ruin a file in a minute. And even then, files were expensive, and that's why a lot of them use planes to shape their stocks. They used scrapers, because there wasn't a lot of sandpaper or something like it available, so they would use scrapers to smooth the stock up. They would burnish it down with sticks of wood and rotten stone and cloth and things like that to make the finish on them.
How long do you think it takes a gunsmith in the 18th century to turn out a weapon?
I've built every single piece of a gun not on the same gun. It takes me a week to make a barrel, and that's with somebody helping me with the anvil and hitting, and the boring is I need somebody to help. Reaming, I need somebody to help. Rifling, I can kind of do myself, but it helps if there's an apprentice standing around. It takes me 2.5 weeks to make a lock. All the little fine fittings and all the screws you got to make.
And it's just that big.
Little bitty stuff, and it takes forever with these tiny little files. And then it takes a day to cast the brass and file it up and make it ready to go on the gun. And it takes me about 3 weeks to make a decently carved wood patch box gun. If I'm doing a metal box, it might take an extra day, because we got to cast a little more brass, and then we've got to cut it out and fit it up. So a month and a half or so, 2 months, if we're working at it.
So a gun's probably going to be the most expensive piece of equipment that somebody's going to have?
A horse, a dog, and a gun are probably what they really need to be reliable. As far as your actual possessions, your gun was probably one of the most expensive, along with your horse.
Yeah, and it's delicate, it needs repaired, and you have to take all this care of it.
Right, and there's, they had a lot of times, like Lewis and Clark took the means to fix just about anything. They freshed a barrel on a gun with an anvil that they drove into a stump that they carried on with them. And so they were able to do that. And they made the cutter. They made all the pieces to make the cutter, which is just little bits of steel, not iron.
Right.
And they had to be able to hold it into the fire and heat treat it so that it would cut. They were able to fix broken stocks. They were able to fix missing a lot of times I've found on the rifles, the cock is broken off at the neck. They were able to braze them back together. Occasionally you found one that was forged, but that ate up a lot of metal. The brazing was a little easier. It didn't always last long, but it gets you there most of the time.
So a pretty wealthy person who's making guns, because it's one of the most important things. It's an expensive thing. Tell me about this idea about why guns aren't. A lot of the guns we see are they're very artistic. They are not extremely utilitarian. Some might be, right? In the
they work. They all work the same. They all function the same. But some, a lot of it had to do with these guys were somewhat prideful, even though they were extremely religious. About the only thing that you could take to town with you was your horse and your gun. If you went to town and you had a gun that had a broken stock, no patch box, no carving, he's a bum. And he might not even have a job. And he might even be kind of an alcoholic. You know, he might have drunk up everything he got. A lot of the market hunters would be given a nice rifle when they go, and by the time they get back, they've consumed enough alcohol that they owe the gun back. And so they lose their gun.
So means of livelihood.
Right. Yeah. And so, you know, I used to compare it to some of the trucks. You know, did you lift your truck? Did you put big wheels on it and tires on it? Did you put pinstripes on it? Did you put a grill guard and lights? And and all that stuff. I said, you had a gun that had a big patch box and nice carving and engraving.
Right. Well, I mean, they're concerned, especially when they're in society, they're concerned with what they're wearing.
Yes.
That says whether they're rich or poor, whether they care about themselves, do they have a special hat, do they have, if they're in a big city, do they have a pocket watch, and is it a fancy one? So a gun's doing the same thing.
It is. It tells you something as soon as the guy walks up and says, that might be a shooter. Because if he's dressed like I am in woods clothes, and he's carrying a rifle like the one I've got, that guy is probably a good shooter, might be a good hunter. He's at least successful because he's got that expensive rifle.
So tell me about the tools of the job. So it takes a lot of tools. Where do they come from? Do you make your own tools?
Sure. There were carving and engraving tools available that you could purchase, but they had a guild system where they had masters, journeymen, and apprentices. And when you were about 14 years old, they would indenture you or some other way, get you a 14-year-old kid come in here that had some prospect, and he would do things like sweep up the floor, pump the bellows, get the charcoal, do the menial task,
Right.
learning what's going to happen. When he starts to learn the actual build, they will say, you need this tool, and here is my tool, go make one. And he'll walk him through helping him make the tools, duplicating what the master's got out of the master's box. And so as that apprentice progresses, he will accumulate the tools needed to do his job as a journeyman so he can leave the shop, or as a master, if he's built his masterpiece and proved it, he can take off and have his own shop, and he's got every piece of equipment that he needs. Even today, I had a cousin that owned a woodcraft store in Lexington, and I would go up and do shows up there and carve, and my payment was generally wood carving tools. So all of my hand tools and all the ones that were just kind of cobbed together and put up, I was able to do. My carving set is woodcraft, and they're all perfect. And these tools only get used to carve. I have another whole set that I use to make the gun. This one carves the gun.
So it's part of the process. You both need the tools, and because you are making tools, you can make
Exactly. And that way, when you finish, you can present a masterpiece. And if you present the masterpiece and it's accepted, then you are a master. You can go have your own shop. If you're a journeyman, you got to go work for another shop. So that's how most of that worked. But yeah, if I need a tool today and I need some, to do a specific task, I'll make it. My scrapers are mostly handmade because I needed stuff to get into certain cracks and crevices and little nooks and crannies, and I'll scrape. That didn't work. Go fix it.
And sometimes a tool that is readily available isn't the perfect tool, isn't just quite what you
Exactly. I've got a couple of chisels that were something else when I bought them, and I've bent them and shaped them and filed them until they were right, rehardened them, timbered them, and got them back. And now they do what I need them to do.
So the gunsmith he's got beautiful, expensive guns. He's got maybe inexpensive guns. Tell me about how much a gun costs for someone in the 18th century.
Okay. The monetary system now and then is different, so it's hard to compare. The Virginia riflemen wanted to be paid in Virginia script when they went up to Pennsylvania because Pennsylvania script was not worth as much. But they got paid in Pennsylvania script, so they went home. And not happy. So it all depended on where you lived because there was no standard. But basically, if you were going to do it then and today, it's about a month and a half's worth of pay for a middle to upper middle class job. So whatever you make as a middle class citizen is probably what the gunsmith was going to make on the rifle that he builds for you. If you couldn't pay for a brass patch box, he just didn't put one on it. There are some patch boxes that don't have the sidearms on it. They apparently couldn't afford it, or didn't want it.
Right.
So it's all in the taste of the customer, and sometimes in the temperament of the gun builder. Some of the cheaper guns, like Fowler's, they were the run-of-the-mill, everyday guns that almost every household probably had one or two in it, even if they had a rifle. They still had one or two Fowler's laying around. Everybody had to do militia duty in the colonies, so specific ages of the men. So they had to have a firelock. It could be a rifle or a musket, and they had to show up with a certain amount of stuff. So if you were a farmer, you didn't particularly care about hunting at all. The only thing you might shoot is the cow at the end of the year when you're going to butcher it, or a hog. There might be a mountain lion panther coming through, and so you might need to take a shot at that. So they're going to buy a surplus musket that's imported. They're going to buy a fowling piece. They were cheaper to import than they were to make here. The way the barrels are made on muskets and Fowlers is different than the way they're made for the rifles. It's harder to make them, more difficult to make, the forging part of it. And there wasn't any money in it. So I could buy a musket and have it sent over here, and it was cheap, really cheap.
Right. So how many pieces from the 18th century have you handled?
I'd say for sure dozens.
Mm-hmm.
I got to be friends with Wallace Gussler, and he's a really good source of finding those things from Colonial Williamsburg. Mel Hankla has the Jamestown show in Kentucky every year. There's a lot of original guns there.
Mm-hmm.
The Kentucky rifle shows, the contemporary rifle shows, and then anywhere I can find real guns, I'm going to go look at them. Mm-hmm. I tell everybody who wants to get into this, if you want to do guns now, those two-dimensional pictures that you're seeing in the books are great.
Yeah.
Seeing them on videos is a step up. Handling it, holding it, knowing the balance, seeing that, well, they're skinnier than I thought they were, or they're a lot heavier than I thought they were. Why are they heavier? And if for me, for marketing, I can handle a heavier gun than a lot of other people because I do it all the time. But I can get somebody, I made a gun for a 92-year-old man. He wanted a nice 1790s rifle. Well, I found a barrel that's very thin, and I was able to downscale and still make an adult-sized rifle that a 92-year-old man could hold offhand. Mm-hmm. And he went squirrel hunting with it. Mm-hmm. So, I have to go with what my customer needs, but there is nothing like holding on to one that if it could just talk. Where's it been? Who's it seen? What did it do? And especially one that you know where it's been and a lot of what it's done. Mm-hmm. And say, this is a real gun. This is not a toy. This is a beautiful piece of art that is deadly. Mm-hmm. And it did its job very well back when it was in use. Mm-hmm. And so that's what I like to build. Those things are so awesome to hold on to and just to examine. Wallace has allowed me to take some apart and really look inside, like how tight did they make the lock mortise? Right, and some of these have got pristine lock mortises. And so you see exactly the craftsmanship the care was taken.
That no one ever sees because it's inside.
You can't see it. Yeah, they don't want you unscrewing them all the time because it'll mess up the screws now. Right. But I've gotten to look inside some of them, and it's neat to see that the workmanship is not, it didn't look like it was cast into it. Mm-hmm. The wood is free. The parts are free to move around in there because they're supposed to. But there's certain pieces that are exactly fit. And to some degree that holds the piece still so that it doesn't move around when the wood starts getting loose, and things like that. In the translation, we've lost something. Mm-hmm. And the same thing with guns. Every gunsmith on the frontier made his own parts. No, it was not economical to do that. Mm-hmm. It's not economical today. I've made one gun barrel. I know how. But it's much less expensive to call one of the manufacturers and pay $250 today, as opposed to $3,000 to $5,000.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense, especially when they might not be able to tell the difference between the two when you're done.
And that one might be better,
yeah,
because I don't do it every day. Mm-hmm. They do, and same with locks. I buy my brass pieces in Philadelphia and anywhere up in Pennsylvania where the bigger cities were. They had foundries. They cast up Lancaster-style guards, butt plates, and trigger guards, and side plates.
Barrel them up and
run them down the wagon road. Mm-hmm. And so Georgia was making Lancaster guns until later when they decided to pair off into their own schools. Mm-hmm. And so each area made up guns the way they wanted them made because now they can have foundries.
Because they have more local industry in that area.
And we're not restricted anymore by somebody across the ocean telling us we can't do it. Mm-hmm. And so we can do our own thing. And Southern rifles became skinnier, lighter, and more deadly. Northern rifles were pretty and probably more
I think
ornate.
You've got an opinion here.
Slightly. It's because I live in the South and most of the guns I build are Southern.
Mm-hmm. Tell me about working with your hands all day and on a piece like this.
It was really interesting that when I went from, I'm a police officer and I do this 2 or 3 hours a day, I wasn't putting that much long-term effort, 8-hour, 10-hour effort into it. I was putting 2 or 3 hours into it. So it wasn't any big deal. When I went full-time, after about 2 weeks, I was soaking my hands every day. I couldn't unclench my fists. My hands were swelling. The calluses. I would go on a week's vacation and come back and my hands are soft and I all of a sudden can't go to the forge and because I got to toughen them back up and little things like that. They're all, how do you do this every day? I said, because I do it every day, and I'm okay with it. And I've built up the little muscles to do what I need to do.
Tell the folks exactly what you do and how they can get a hold of you.
Okay. I live in South Central Kentucky in a little place called Edmonton. It's 1,586 people, give or take the week. I build American long rifles or European guns. I've done Fowlers, Jaegers, English, German, Swiss, Austrian, whatever, and pretty much all colonies, as well as up to about the middle of the Caplock era. I kind of lose interest after that. But if you tell me that you want a specific gun, that's what I'll build you.
If you'd like more information about Mike Miller, we'll put that down in the description section. If you're interested in more gun building and gun videos, make sure to check out this link.